Seeing the color of his skin, a racist restaurant owner asked Marcus, a black veteran, to get out of his restaurant. But little did he know who was witnessing his cruelty. Who was this mysterious figure? And how did he help Marcus fight back? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Marcus and Mary cruised through the busy streets of their hometown. Marcus's strong hands gripped the steering wheel, his eyes focused on the road ahead. Mary sat beside him, her fingers tapping excitedly on her knee. "Can you believe it, Marcus?" Mary's voice bubbled with enthusiasm. "We are finally going to do what we always dreamed of." Marcus glanced at his wife, a warm smile spreading across his face. "I know, honey. It feels like we've been thinking about this forever." "Remember when we first met?" Mary chuckled. "You were always talking about opening your own place someday." Marcus nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "And you said you'd be right there with me, making the best pies in town." Marcus's army days were long behind him, and now he had both the time and the resources it took to open up this new venture. As they drove, the familiar sights of their town rolled by. The park where they had their first date, the church where they got married, and the bank where they'd saved every penny for their dream. "I'm a little nervous," Marcus admitted, his voice softening. "Brad's Diner is a big deal around here." Mary reached over and squeezed his arm. "Hey, we've got this. Your recipes are amazing, and we make a great team." Marcus took a deep breath, drawing strength from Mary's words. "You're right. I'm sure they will be impressed and at least consider letting us partner with them." As they neared their destination, the bustling Main Street came into view. Brad's Diner stood out, its neon sign glowing even in the daylight. Cars filled the parking lot, a testament to its popularity. "Wow, look at all those people," Mary said, her eyes wide. "Brad must be doing something right." Marcus nodded, a mix of admiration and determination in his eyes. "That's why we want to learn from him. A franchise could be our ticket to success." They stepped out of the car, straightening their clothes and taking deep breaths. As they walked toward the entrance, Mary slipped her hand into Marcus's, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "This could be our big chance, Marcus," she whispered, her voice full of excitement and anticipation. As Marcus and Mary stepped into Brad's Diner, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon enveloped them. Brad, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a crisp white shirt, emerged from behind the counter. His eyes lit up as he spotted Mary, a wide smile spreading across his face. "Welcome to Brad's Diner," he exclaimed, his gaze fixed on Mary. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of seeing you here before. I'm Brad Thompson, the owner. Come, please let me show you to your seat." Mary smiled politely, her hand still intertwined with Marcus's. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Thompson. I'm Mary Brown, and this is my husband, Marcus." Brad's smile faltered for a split second as his eyes shifted to Marcus. The warmth in his voice cooled noticeably. "Oh, I see. Hello, Marcus." Marcus extended his hand, determined to maintain his composure. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thompson. We've heard great things about your diner." Brad hesitated for a moment before shaking Marcus's hand, his grip loose and brief. "Thank you," he replied curtly, his eyes already darting back to Mary. Mary, sensing the sudden shift in Brad's demeanor, squeezed Marcus's hand reassuringly. "We were hoping to discuss a business proposition with you, Mr. Thompson. Do you have a moment to sit down with us?" Brad's eyebrows raised slightly, his interest piqued. "A business proposition, you say? Well, I suppose I could spare a few minutes. Follow me." As Brad led them to a table, Marcus couldn't help but notice how the owner's body language changed. Brad walked slightly ahead, his shoulders tense and his steps quick. When they reached an empty booth, Brad gestured for Mary to sit first, pulling out the chair for her with a flourish. "Please make yourself comfortable," Brad said to Mary, his voice once again warm and inviting. As Marcus moved to sit next to his wife, Brad's smile tightened. "Perhaps you'd like to sit across from your wife, sir. It might be more comfortable for our discussion." Marcus paused, caught off guard by the suggestion. He glanced at Mary, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. Swallowing his discomfort, Marcus slid into the seat across from Mary. Mary took a deep breath, ready to launch into their proposal, but Marcus spoke up first. Mr. Thompson, we've been dreaming of opening our own restaurant for years. We've worked hard, saved up, and now we're ready to take the next step. Brad's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze fixed on Marcus. Is that so? He said, his tone neutral. Marcus nodded, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. Yes, sir. We've always admired your success here at Brad's Diner, and we were hoping to discuss the possibility of a franchise opportunity. A franchise, you say? Brad leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Marcus. That's quite an ambitious goal. What makes you think you're ready for such a responsibility? Mary leaned forward, her voice eager. We've been planning this for years, Mr. Thompson. I have been a professional cook, and Marcus has years of leadership experience from his days in the Army. We believe we have what it takes to make a Brad's Diner franchise successful. Brad nodded slowly, his gaze softening as he looked at Mary. I see. And you're both committed to this idea? Absolutely, Marcus and Mary said in unison, their voices filled with determination. Brad's eyes flickered back to Marcus, the warmth in his expression fading once more. Well, I appreciate your interest in my business. However, franchising is a complex process. It requires a significant investment, not just financially, but in terms of time and effort as well. Marcus nodded, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his chest. We understand that, Mr. Thompson. We're prepared to put in the work and make the necessary investments. Brad's eyes narrowed as he leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a sneer. Let me be frank with you, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. I've been in this business for over 20 years, and I can tell you right now, you don't have what it takes. Marcus felt his heart sink, but he kept his face neutral. With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, how can you be so sure? You haven't even heard our full proposal. Brad scoffed, his gaze fixed solely on Marcus now. I don't need to hear it. Running a successful restaurant takes more than just cooking skills and military experience. It takes business savvy, connections, and, well, let's just say a certain image. Mary's eyes widened in disbelief. Mr. Thompson, I don't understand. We've put together a solid business plan. We've done our research and… Research? Brad interrupted, laughing coldly. Tell me, do you two even have the money for this? Opening a restaurant isn't cheap, you know. It's not like flipping burgers in your backyard. Marcus felt his face grow hot, but he kept his voice steady. We've saved up for years, Mr. Thompson. We're prepared to make the necessary investment. Brad rolled his eyes. Sure, I'm sure you've got a nice little nest egg saved up from your Army days. But let me tell you something. This town has certain expectations when it comes to its businesses. People here like to feel comfortable when they're dining out. The implication in Brad's words hung heavy in the air. Mary gasped softly, her face flushing with anger. Mr. Thompson, are you implying what I think you're implying? Brad shrugged, a smug smile on his face. I'm just being honest. My customers expect a certain level of, let's call it familiarity. They might not feel at ease with someone like him running the show. Marcus clenched his fists under the table, fighting to keep his composure. Someone like me? What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Thompson? Oh, come on now, Brad said, his voice dripping with condescension. Don't play dumb. You know exactly what I mean. This is a respectable establishment. I can't risk my reputation by partnering with, well, people like you. Mary stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. How dare you, she exclaimed, her voice shaking with fury. Marcus is a decorated veteran, a skilled leader, and one of the kindest, most hardworking people I know. The color of his skin has nothing to do with his ability to run a successful restaurant. Brad's face hardened, all pretense of politeness gone. Listen here, lady. I don't know what kind of fantasy world you're living in, but in the real world, these things matter. I've worked too hard to build this business to risk it all on some misguided attempt at charity. Marcus stood up slowly, placing a gentle hand on Mary's arm. Mary, it's okay. We should go. No, it's not okay, Mary protested, tears of frustration welling up in her eyes. This is blatant discrimination. You can't just… I can do whatever I damn well please, Brad snapped, rising to his feet. This is my restaurant, and I decide who I do business with. And I'm telling you right now, I don't partner with people like him. Now get out of my diner before I call the police. Marcus took a deep breath, his jaw clenched tight as he fought to control his emotions. He gently placed his hand on Mary's back, guiding her towards the door. Come on, Mary. We're leaving. Brad's face was red with anger as he pointed towards the exit. That's right. Get out of here. And don't even think about coming back. As they walked through the diner, Marcus could feel the eyes of the other customers on them. Some looked confused, others uncomfortable, and a few even seemed sympathetic. But Marcus kept his gaze straight ahead, determined not to give Brad the satisfaction of seeing him break. Mary, on the other hand, couldn't contain her fury. She turned back to Brad, her voice shaking with emotion. You should be ashamed of yourself. This isn't over. Brad just smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. Oh, I think it is. Now scram before I call the cops. As they reached the door, Marcus held it open for Mary. She stepped out into the warm afternoon sun, blinking back angry tears. Marcus followed. For a moment, they just stood there on the sidewalk, trying to process what had just happened. I can't believe he said those things, Mary sputtered. How can people still think like that in this day and age? Marcus sighed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. It's okay, Mary. Let's just go home. But Mary wasn't ready to let it go. No, it's not okay. We can't just let him get away with this. We should report him, or... Marcus shook his head, his voice gentle but firm. And then what? It'll be our word against his. People like Brad, they always find a way to twist things around. Mary looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But it's not fair, Marcus. You've worked so hard, sacrificed so much. How can he just dismiss all of that because of the color of your skin? Marcus pulled her close, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. I know it's not fair, but getting angry won't change anything. We just need to keep moving forward, keep working towards our dream. Over in Brad's dinner, Andrew Warren sat in a corner booth, his fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. He had witnessed the entire confrontation between Brad, Marcus, and Mary as he sat in a seat close to Brad's office. Andrew took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving Brad as. The restaurant owner strutted back to the counter, a smug look on his face. It was a stark contrast to the way Brad had greeted Andrew earlier, all smiles and handshakes. Mayor Warren's always a pleasure to see you, Brad had said, pulling out all the stops to impress the influential black businessman and political figure. Now as Andrew watched Brad's true colors shine through, he felt a mixture of anger and disappointment. He'd always suspected Brad's friendly demeanor towards him was just a facade, but seeing it confirmed so clearly left a bitter taste in his mouth. Andrew leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. He thought about all the times he'd heard whispers about Brad's treatment of minorities, but never had concrete proof. Now, he'd seen it with his own eyes. It's not right, Andrew muttered to himself, shaking his head. He knew that his position as mayor gave him a certain level of protection from Brad's prejudice, but it didn't sit well with him that others weren't afforded the same respect. As he watched Brad chat animatedly with some regular customers, Andrew made a silent promise to himself. One day, he would find a way to hold Brad accountable for his actions. It might not be today, and it might not be tomorrow, but Andrew was determined to see justice served. He finished his coffee, leaving a generous tip for the waitress. As he stood to leave, Brad noticed him and called out, "Heading out so soon, Mayor? Hope everything was to your satisfaction." Andrew forced a polite smile. "Everything was fine, Brad. Thank you." Marcus and Mary walked slowly towards their car, their shoulders slumped and their steps heavy. As they neared their car, a voice called out behind them, "Excuse me, wait up a moment, please." They turned to see a well-dressed man hurrying towards them. It took Marcus a second to recognize him, but when he did, his eyes widened in surprise. "Mayor Warnes?" he said, his voice filled with confusion. Andrew Warnes caught up to them, slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I saw what happened in there. I wanted to make sure you were both all right." Mary looked at Marcus, then back at the mayor. You saw that?" Andrew nodded, his face serious. I did, and I'm disgusted by Brad's behavior. It was completely unacceptable. Marcus stood a little straighter, touched by the concern from such a prominent figure. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your concern. Please call me Andrew, the mayor said with a warm smile. What Brad did in there, it's not okay. I want you to know that his views don't represent our community. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He'd heard of Andrew Warnes, of course. The man was a successful black businessman who had become mayor, a beacon of hope for many in their town. To have him reach out like this meant more than Andrew could know. Thank you, Andrew, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. It means a lot to hear you say that. Andrew placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Don't let people like Brad crush your dreams. This town needs more people like you two, people with vision and determination. Mary wiped a tear from her eye. We've always dreamed of opening our own restaurant. We thought partnering with Brad might be our chance. But now, Andrew's eyes lit up. A restaurant? That's wonderful. Listen, if you need any help or advice, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to assist in any way I can. Marcus felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Really? You'd do that for us? Absolutely, Andrew said firmly. This town could use more diverse businesses, and I have a feeling you two have something special to offer. Here's my card. Call my office anytime and we'll set up a meeting. As Andrew handed over his business card, Marcus felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. I don't know what to say, sir. Andrew, thank you so much. Andrew smiled warmly. You're very welcome. Don't let today's setback discourage you. Keep pushing forward, and remember, you have allies in this town. With a final handshake and words of encouragement, Andrew turned to leave. Marcus and Mary watched him go, a new sense of hope blooming between them. Later that night, Marcus and Mary sat on their worn but comfortable couch in their small apartment. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Then Mary sat up straighter, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. What if we did it on our own, she said, without Brad's franchise or brand name? Marcus turned to look at her, surprise etched on his face. You mean start from scratch? Mary nodded eagerly. Why not? We've got the skills, the passion, and the vision. We don't need Brad or his name to become successful. As the idea sank in, Marcus felt a flutter of excitement in his chest. You know what? You might be onto something there. They spent the next few hours talking animatedly about their dream restaurant. They discussed menu ideas, decor themes, and potential locations. The more they talked, the more real it felt. But as the night wore on, reality began to set in. Marcus's face fell as he looked at their budget spreadsheet on his laptop. Mary, he said softly, even if we put all our savings together, we're still short on funding. Mary's smile faded a bit, but she refused to let go of hope. How short are we? Marcus showed her the numbers and they both fell silent. The gap between what they had and what they needed seemed insurmountable. Maybe we could get a loan, Mary suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus shook his head. With our credit scores and no collateral? It's unlikely. They continued to brainstorm ideas, but each one seemed less feasible than the last. As the clock ticked past midnight, exhaustion began to set in. Mary yawned, stretching her arms above her head. We've been at this for hours. Maybe we should get some sleep and look at it with fresh eyes tomorrow. Marcus nodded, closing his laptop with a soft click. You're right. We're not going to solve this tonight. Mary came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her chin on his shoulder. Hey, she said softly, meeting his eyes in the mirror. We'll figure this out. Some way will come up. I just know it. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, determined to find a solution to their funding problem. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, flipping through the local newspaper. His eyes scanned the pages, searching for any glimmer of hope. As Mary prepared breakfast, Marcus picked up the phone and started making calls. He had a list of potential investors he'd researched online the night before. Hello, Mr. Johnson. This is Marcus Brown. I was hoping to discuss a business opportunity with you, he said, trying to keep his voice steady and confident. But before Marcus could even explain his restaurant idea, Mr. Johnson cut him off. Sorry, not interested, he said curtly and hung up. Marcus sighed, his shoulders slumping, but he didn't give up. He dialed the next number on his list. Good morning, Ms. Rodriguez. I'm calling about a potential investment opportunity. Again and again, Marcus made calls. And again he was turned down. Some were polite, others dismissive, but none gave him a chance to fully explain his proposal. As he hung up after his fifth rejection, Mary placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Don't give up, honey, she said softly. The right opportunity will come along. Marcus nodded, trying to believe her words. He turned back to the newspaper, flipping through the pages once more. Suddenly, something caught his eye. Look at this, he said, pointing to a small ad in the corner of the page. Local investor seeking new business opportunities. Open consultations this week. Mary leaned in to read the ad. That sounds promising. It's better to meet someone in person than to call and ask anyway. Why don't we go check it out? Marcus felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. You're right. Let's go. They quickly got ready and headed out, the ad clutched tightly in Marcus's hand. As they drove to the address listed, Marcus rehearsed his pitch in his head, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Marcus and Mary arrived at the investor's office, a sleek building in the heart of downtown. They were greeted by a receptionist who directed them to wait in a plush lobby. Marcus nervously straightened his tie while Mary gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Mr. and Mrs. Brown? A voice called out. They looked up to see a well-dressed man in his 50s. I'm Kevin Peterson. Please come into my office. They followed Mr. Peterson into a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He gestured for them to sit in the chairs across from his large mahogany desk. So, Mr. Peterson began, leaning back in his chair, tell me about this business opportunity of yours. Marcus took a deep breath and launched into his pitch. We're looking to open a restaurant that combines traditional Southern comfort food with modern, healthy twists. We believe there's a real market for this kind of cuisine in our community. As Marcus spoke passionately about their vision, Mr. Peterson's polite smile never wavered, but his eyes seemed to grow colder. He nodded along, occasionally jotting down notes. When Marcus finished, Mr. Peterson set down his pen and folded his hands on the desk. That's certainly an interesting idea, Mr. Brown. Tell me, what's your background in the restaurant industry? Marcus explained that he doesn't have any background in this industry, while also explaining that his wife is an excellent cook. Mr. Peterson listened, his expression unreadable. I see. And have you ever owned a business before? No, sir, Marcus admitted. But I've been saving and planning for this for years. I'm ready to put in the work to make it successful. In my experience, it's best to stay in your lane, so to speak. Start with something more manageable for someone of your background, said Mr. Peterson. You see, I don't really have any issues with you two, but no investor would want to put their dollar on someone who comes without any solid experience or influential backing. That's how things work these days. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Thank you for your time, Mr. Peterson, he said, his voice cold. But I think we're done here. Marcus and Mary exited the building. The bright afternoon sun felt at odds with their gloomy mood as they walked across the parking lot to their car. I can't believe this, Marcus muttered, shaking his head. It's like they didn't even give us a chance. Mary reached out and squeezed his hand. I know, honey. It's not fair. As they reached their car, Marcus suddenly stopped and turned to face Mary. His eyes were filled with a mix of anger and frustration. Did you see how he looked at us? Marcus asked, his voice tight with emotion. It's like he made up his mind before we even opened our mouths. Mary nodded, her own expression sad. I noticed. He kept asking about your background, as if that was all that mattered. Marcus leaned against the car, running a hand over his face. It's not just about experience, Mary. They're judging us before they even know us. How are we supposed to succeed when people won't even give us a chance? You're right, Mary agreed. It's not just about our lack of business experience. They're judging us on superficial standards, but we can't let that define us or our dream. As Marcus and Mary stood in the parking lot processing their frustration, a familiar voice cut through their conversation. They turned to see Brad approaching, a smug smile plastered across his face. "Well, well," Brad called out, his tone dripping with condescension. "If it isn't the wannabe restaurateurs, how'd your little meeting go?" Marcus tensed, his jaw clenching as he tried to maintain his composure. Mary placed a gentle hand on his arm, silently urging him to stay calm. Brad sauntered closer, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Let me guess," he sneered. "They didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for you, did they?" Mary stepped forward, her voice firm but controlled. "Our business is none of your concern, Brad." Brad laughed, a harsh sound that grated on their nerves. "Oh, but it is my concern. You see, I can't have amateurs like you thinking they can just waltz in and open up shop in my town." Marcus took a deep breath, fighting to keep his anger in check. "We have every right to pursue our dream, Brad. Your opinion doesn't change that." "Dream?" Brad scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Wake up, folks. This isn't some fairy tale where everyone gets a happy ending." He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a cruel whisper. "Face it, you two are way out of your league. You don't have what it takes to make it in this business." Mary's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't know anything about us or what we're capable of." Brad's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed almost predatory. "Oh, I know enough. I've seen your type before, all big dreams and no substance. Trust me, you're better off quitting now before you embarrass yourselves even more." Marcus felt his hands ball into fists at his sides. He wanted nothing more than to wipe that smug look off Brad's face, but he knew that would only prove Brad right about him. "You think you're so much better than everyone else," Marcus said, his voice low and controlled. "But all I see is a small-minded bully who's afraid of a little competition." Brad's expression darkened for a moment before he forced out a laugh. "Competition? Please, you two couldn't compete with a hot dog stand, let alone a real restaurant like mine." He turned to leave but paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Do yourselves a favor and quit now. Save yourselves the humiliation of failing spectacularly. Leave the restaurant business to those who actually know what they're doing." With that final jab, Brad walked away, leaving Marcus and Mary standing in stunned silence. The weight of his cruel words hung in the air between them, threatening to crush the dream they had worked so hard to build. "Do you think Mayor Andrew will remember us?" Mary asked, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Marcus nodded slowly. "I hope so." He seemed genuinely concerned that day at Brad's diner. Taking a deep breath, they stepped out of the car and made their way to the city hall. The cool air inside was a stark contrast to the warm summer day outside. They approached the receptionist, who greeted them with a polite smile. "We'd like to speak with Mayor Andrew, please," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his nerves. The receptionist checked the schedule. "Do you have an appointment?" Mary shook her head. "No, but we met the mayor briefly a while ago. We were hoping he might have a few minutes to spare." After a quick phone call, the receptionist directed them to wait. Marcus and Mary sat side by side. A few minutes later, Mayor Andrew appeared, his face lighting up with recognition. "Marcus, Mary, it's good to see you again. Please, come to my office." They followed him down a hallway lined with photographs of the city's history. Once inside his office, Andrew gestured for them to sit. "What brings you here today?" he asked, his tone warm and inviting. Marcus cleared his throat. "Well, sir, we've been trying to open our restaurant, but we've hit some roadblocks." Mary nodded, adding, "We've faced challenges. Investors don't seem interested in hearing us out." Andrew leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "I see. Can you tell me more about what's been happening?" For the next several minutes, Marcus and Mary took turns explaining their experiences, the rejection from Brad, the dismissive investor, and the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination they'd faced. As they spoke, Andrew listened intently, his expression growing more serious. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, thinking. "I'm truly sorry you've had to go through all that," he said finally. "Unfortunately, What you've experienced isn't uncommon, but that doesn't make it right. Marcus nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly. We understand. We don't know where to go from here. Andrew leaned forward again, his eyes filled with determination. Let me be clear, what's happened to you is unacceptable. As mayor, I have a responsibility to ensure that all our citizens have equal opportunities. He paused, considering his next words carefully. I can't make any promises, but I want you to know that I will do what I can to help. Your dream is important, and I believe our community would benefit from your restaurant. Mary's eyes widened with hope. Really? You'd be willing to help us? Andrew smiled warmly. Of course. It might take some time, but I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, don't give up. Keep working on your business plan. Keep refining your ideas. When the right opportunity comes, you'll be ready. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Thank you, Mayor Andrew. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen and offer your support. They stood up, shaking hands with Andrew. As they left his office, Marcus and Mary felt a renewed sense of hope. They might not have all the answers yet, but knowing they had an ally in their corner made all the difference. After Marcus and Mary left, Andrew sat back in his chair, deep in thought. He had meant every word he'd said to them, but he knew that words alone weren't enough. Silently, he made a decision. He would help Marcus and Mary not just with encouragement but with concrete action. It was time to use his influence and resources to make a real difference. The next few days passed by quite quickly. The couple had slowly started to lose belief, thinking they might not be able to make it. Marcus sat on his couch, watching TV, when Mary's footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Marcus, honey," she called out, "there's a letter for us." He looked up as she entered the room, an envelope in her hand. "Who's it from?" he asked, curiosity piquing his interest. Mary shrugged, examining the envelope. "No return address. It just says anonymous on it." Mary sat down beside him, carefully opening the envelope. As she unfolded the letter inside, a check fluttered onto the table. Marcus picked it up, his eyes widening as he saw the amount. "Mary," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Look at this." Mary glanced at the check, then back at the letter. Her eyes scanned the page, growing larger with each line. "Marcus," she breathed, It's a grant. For our restaurant." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "What? How?" Mary read aloud, her voice trembling with excitement. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Brown, we are pleased to inform you that your restaurant project has been selected for a charitable grant from the city. The enclosed funds are to be used for the establishment of your business." Marcus could hardly believe his ears. He looked at the check again, making sure he hadn't imagined the number of zeros. This is enough to get us started. More than enough." Mary's eyes filled with tears of joy. "It's really happening, Marcus. Our dream is coming true." They embraced, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. After a moment, Marcus pulled back, his face thoughtful. "But who could have done this? We didn't apply for any grants." Mary shook her head, equally puzzled. "I don't know. The letter doesn't say. It just mentions it's an anonymous donation through a city charity program." Little did they know that it was Mayor Andrew who decided to help them, seeing their humiliation the other day, and deciding to give them a chance despite all odds. Marcus stood up, pacing the kitchen. "This changes everything, Mary. We can actually do this now. We can open our restaurant." Mary nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We should start looking for a location right away, and we need to finalize our menu, our business plan." For the next few hours, they pored over their plans, discussing every detail with renewed enthusiasm. The weight of financial worry had been lifted from their shoulders, replaced by the excitement of turning their dream into reality. As the day wore on, they decided to take a drive around town, scouting potential locations for their restaurant. As they cruised down Main Street, Mary suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm. "Look!" she exclaimed, pointing at a for sale sign in the window of an old storefront. "It's right across from Brad's Diner." Marcus slowed the car, studying the building. It was an older structure, but it had character, and the location was perfect, right in the heart of the busiest part of town. They exchanged a look, both thinking the same thing. This was it. This was where they would build their dream. Without hesitation, Marcus pulled over and parked the car. They got out and stood in front of the building, imagining the possibilities. "What do you think?" Mary asked, squeezing Marcus's hand. Marcus smiled, a determined glint in his eye. "I think we're going to give Brad a run for his money." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity for Marcus and Mary. They threw themselves into the work of bringing their dream restaurant to life. The old storefront they had chosen buzzed with activity. Construction workers came and went, transforming the space into something truly special. Marcus oversaw the renovations, his military background lending itself well to coordinating the various teams. "I want this place to feel warm and welcoming," Mary told the interior designer. "Like you're coming home to a family dinner." The designer nodded, sketching out ideas. Together, they created a unique space that blended modern comfort with homey touches. Warm wood tones dominated the decor. As the weeks passed, the restaurant began to take shape. Marcus and Mary poured their hearts into every detail. They installed an open kitchen, allowing diners to see the chefs at work. A cozy bar area invited patrons to linger over drinks and appetizers. 2 months flew by in a blur of paint swatches, menu tastings, and late-night planning sessions. Finally, the day arrived when they could step back and admire their handiwork. "It's beautiful," Mary whispered, her eyes shining as she took in the finished space. Marcus squeezed her hand. "It's perfect," he agreed. As word spread about the new restaurant, excitement built in the community. People walking by would peer in the windows, eager for a glimpse of what was to come. Mary spent countless hours in the kitchen perfecting her recipes. Her love for cooking shone through in every dish she created. The aromas wafting from the kitchen during their test runs had mouths watering up and down the street. Their kind nature and warm personalities attracted a loyal following even before they officially opened. They made a point of greeting everyone who showed interest, sharing their story and vision for the restaurant. Across the street, Brad watched the commotion with growing unease. He had dismissed Marcus and Mary's dream as a pipe dream, but now he was faced with the reality of serious competition. As the days went by, Brad noticed a decline in his own business. Regular customers were talking excitedly about trying the new place when it opened. Some even asked him if he knew anything about the owners. Brad's paranoia grew. Who could be behind this sudden competition? He couldn't believe that Marcus and Mary had managed this on their own. There had to be someone else pulling the strings, someone with money and influence. As the days passed, Brad's once bustling diner began to feel eerily quiet. The familiar chatter of regular customers dwindled, replaced by an unsettling silence. As Marcus and Mary were finishing a busy evening at the restaurant, a man in a suit walked in. He looked around the place with a satisfied smile and approached the counter. Marcus greeted him warmly, assuming he was just another customer. "Welcome. Can I help you with something?" Marcus asked. The man smiled and nodded. "Just grabbing a quick bite, but I wanted to say how nice it is to see this place thriving." "Thank you," Marcus replied, unsure if he recognized the man. The official leaned in slightly. "I work at City Hall. Mayor Andrews' office was really pleased to help you two get started. He believes in supporting businesses like yours. If you ever need anything else, don't hesitate to reach out. The mayor is proud of what you've built here." Marcus froze, the weight of the words sinking in. "Mayor Andrew helped us?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise. The official smiled knowingly. "Yes, the funding grant. He wanted to keep it quiet, but yes, that's from him." The man grabbed his takeout bag and left with a friendly nod, leaving Marcus standing there in awe. He quickly called Mary over, and together they realized the truth. Mayor Andrew had been their benefactor all along. Across the street, Brad watched helplessly as his loyal patrons, one by one, drifted across the street to Marcus and Mary's new restaurant. One night after closing his nearly empty diner, Brad's emotions boiled over. He couldn't stand it anymore. The thought of Marcus and Mary succeeding where he believed they should have failed consumed him. In a moment of blind fury, he made a decision that would change everything. Under the cover of darkness, Brad slipped on a black hoodie and a mask. He grabbed a can of spray paint and a heavy wrench from his toolbox. With trembling hands, he made his way across the street to Marcus and Mary's restaurant. The street was deserted. The only sound the distant bark of a dog. Brad's heart raced as he approached the front of the restaurant. He hesitated for a moment, then raised the wrench. The sound of shattering glass pierced the night as he smashed the front windows. Brad's breath came in ragged gasps as he continued his destructive rampage. He spray-painted, "Close down or else," in angry red letters across the front wall. The mask made it hard to breathe, and in his frenzy, he didn't notice it slipping down his face. Unknown to Brad, a security camera silently captured every moment of his vandalism, including his exposed face. He remained oblivious, too caught up in his act of vengeance to notice the blinking red light of the camera. Satisfied with the damage he'd caused, Brad quickly fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of broken glass and hateful graffiti. He ran back to his diner, his heart pounding, believing he had taught Marcus and Mary a lesson they wouldn't forget. The next morning, Marcus arrived early to open the restaurant. His heart sank as he took in the sight of the vandalized storefront. Shards of glass crunched under his feet as he carefully made his way to the door. "No, no, no," he muttered, his voice thick with disbelief and anger. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called Mary. "Someone trashed the restaurant last night," he said when she answered, his voice cracking. "There's broken glass everywhere and they left a message." Mary arrived within minutes, her face pale with shock as she surveyed the damage. "Oh, Marcus," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "Who would do this?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "I have a pretty good idea," he said, his eyes darting across the street to Brad's diner. "But we need proof. Let's check the security footage." They went inside and pulled up the previous night's security feed on the computer. As they watched the masked figure smash the windows and spray paint the walls, Mary gasped. "Look," she exclaimed, pointing at the screen. His mask slipped. Sure enough, the camera had captured a clear shot of Brad's face as he vandalized their property. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides. "We've got him," he said, his voice low and angry. "We should call the police right now." But Mary placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Wait," she said softly. "I think we should hold on to this for now. We don't want to act rashly." Marcus looked at her, confusion evident on his face. "But Mary, we can't just let him get away with this." Mary nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know, and we won't. But if we report this now, it might just escalate things. Let's wait for the right moment. We have the evidence. It's not going anywhere." Marcus took a deep breath, considering her words. Finally, he nodded. "You're right," he said. "We'll wait. But I'm not letting this go." "Of course not," Mary agreed. "For now, let's focus on getting this cleaned up and repaired. We can't let this setback stop us." Together, they called a repair service and spent the morning cleaning up the mess. By afternoon, new windows were installed, and the hateful message was painted over. They then continued with their business as usual. Brad paced back and forth in his empty diner, his face twisted with anger and disbelief. He peered out the window, watching as customers streamed into Marcus and Mary's restaurant across the street. The sight made his blood boil. "How?" he muttered to himself. "How did they bounce back so quickly? Where did they get the money for all this?" He had been sure that his act of vandalism would crush their spirits and their business. Instead, they seemed more determined than ever. The new windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the freshly painted walls showed no trace of his hateful message. Brad's paranoia grew with each passing day. He couldn't understand how Marcus and Mary had gained so much support and funding. In his mind, they didn't deserve this success. He was convinced there had to be something illegal going on behind the scenes. As he brooded, an idea began to form in his mind. If he couldn't destroy their business from the outside, maybe he could do it from within. He needed someone on the inside, someone who could gather information and potentially sabotage their operations. Brad's eyes landed on Alan, one of his most trusted employees. Alan was a smart and cunning young guy, eager to earn money. He had worked for Brad for a few months. Even though Brad was cruel and bossy to him, He knew Alan would not deny his requests if he dangled money in front of him. "Alan," Brad called out, "come here, I've got a job for you." Alan appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "What's up, boss?" Brad led him to a quiet corner of the diner. "I need you to do something important for me," he said in a low voice. "I want you to apply for a job at Marcus's restaurant." Alan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "What? Why?" "I need someone on the inside," Brad explained, his voice filled with urgency. "I need to know how they're operating, where they got their money from. There's got to be something fishy going on over there." Alan nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "You want me to spy on them?" "Exactly," Brad said, a sly smile spreading across his face. "Get hired, gain their trust, and then feed me information. And if you can cause a little chaos while you're at it, even better." Alan hesitated for a moment. "But boss, what about my job here?" Brad waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that. I'll keep your position open and you will keep getting paid. This is more important right now. We need to take them down before they run us out of business." Alan straightened up, a determined look in his eyes. "All right, boss. I'll do it. I'll go there first thing tomorrow morning." Brad clapped him on the shoulder. "That's what I like to hear. Remember, act natural. Don't let them suspect anything. And Alan," he added, his voice turning cold, "don't disappoint me." As Alan nodded and walked away, Brad turned back to the window, watching Marcus's restaurant with narrowed eyes. The next morning, Alan approached Marcus's restaurant. He had purposely messed up his hair and worn tattered clothes to look the part of someone down on money. Marcus looked up from the counter, a welcoming smile on his face. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Alan shuffled his feet, playing the role of a desperate job seeker. I was wondering if you had any work available. I really need a job, sir." Marcus's eyes softened with sympathy. He glanced around the bustling restaurant, then back at Alan. "Well, we could use an extra pair of hands. Do you have any experience in restaurants?" Alan shook his head, looking dejected. "No, sir. But I'm a quick learner and I'll work hard, I promise. I really need it, please." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll give you a chance. Everyone deserves an opportunity, right? Let's start you as a busboy and see how it goes." Alan felt a pang of guilt at Marcus's kindness, but pushed it aside. He had a job to do. Over the next few weeks, Alan began his subtle sabotage. He'd mix up orders, accidentally drop utensils, and create small issues with customers. Each time, Marcus would patiently correct him, never losing his cool. As days passed, Alan's actions grew bolder. He'd forget to refill water glasses, bring out cold food, and make careless mistakes in taking orders. Despite the growing frustration from customers, Marcus continued to defend him, always taking responsibility for Alan's errors. One busy evening, a well-known food critic visited the restaurant. Alan saw his chance for a major disruption. As he carried a tray of drinks to the critic's table, he pretended to trip, sending the beverages flying all over the critic's expensive suit. The critic jumped up, his face red with anger. "You incompetent fool," he shouted, grabbing Alan by the collar. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" Before Alan could react, Marcus was there, gently separating them. "Sir, I'm so sorry for this incident," he said calmly to the critic. "It's entirely my fault. I should have trained my staff better. Please allow me to cover the cost of your dry cleaning and offer you a complimentary meal." The critic glared at Marcus, then at Alan, before slowly releasing his grip. "Fine," he growled. "But this better not happen again." As Marcus led the critic to a new table, profusely apologizing, Alan stood frozen, overwhelmed by Marcus's kindness and his own shame. He watched as Marcus smoothed things over, never once blaming Alan for the incident. Later that night, as they were closing up, Alan couldn't bear the weight of his deception any longer. With guilt in his eyes, he approached Marcus. "Mr. Brown," he said, his voice shaking, "I need to tell you something." Marcus looked up, concern etched on his face. "What is it, Alan?" Alan took a deep breath. I've been lying to you." Brad sent me here to ruin your restaurant. All those mistakes, the problems with customers. I did it on purpose." Marcus stood still for a moment, absorbing Alan's confession. His face remained calm, showing no signs of anger or betrayal. Instead, a look of understanding crossed his features. "I appreciate your honesty, Alan," Marcus said softly. "It takes courage to admit when you've done something wrong." Alan's eyes widened in surprise. He had expected anger, maybe even to be fired on the spot, but Marcus's calm demeanor caught him off guard. "You're not mad?" Alan asked hesitantly. Marcus shook his head. "Disappointed, yes, but not mad. We all make mistakes, Alan. What matters is how we choose to make things right." Alan felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Mr. Brown, I'm so sorry. I never meant to. I mean, I did at first, but then I saw how kind you were and I just couldn't." Marcus held up a hand, stopping Alan's rambling. "It's okay. I understand. But tell me, why did Brad send you here?" Alan took a deep breath. He wanted to ruin your business, of course, but he also wanted to know who your benefactor was, the one who donated money to help you start up. He's been obsessing over it. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. After a moment of consideration, he spoke. "Alan, I want you to deliver a message to Brad for me." Alan straightened up, eager to make amends. "Of course, anything." "Tell him our benefactor is Mayor Andrew," Marcus said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And let him know we're hosting a dinner for the mayor this weekend." Alan nodded, committing the information to memory. "I will, Mr. Brown. And again, I'm so sorry for everything." Marcus placed a hand on Alan's shoulder. "We all deserve second chances, Alan. Now go. Deliver that message." As Alan left the restaurant, he felt a mix of emotions. Relief at having confessed, admiration for Marcus's forgiveness, and a newfound determination to do the right thing. He made his way straight to Brad's diner, his steps quick and purposeful. When he arrived, he found Brad in his office, poring over financial reports with a scowl on his face. "What do you want?" Brad snapped as Alan entered. Alan took a deep breath. "I have information about Marcus's restaurant." Brad's eyes lit up with interest. "Well, spit it out." "Their benefactor is Mayor Andrew," Alan said, "and they're hosting a dinner for him this weekend." Brad's face contorted with anger and disbelief. "The mayor? That's impossible." Alan shrugged. "That's what Marcus told me." Brad slammed his fist on the desk. "I can't believe this. How did that... He trailed off, unable to find words vile enough to express his frustration. Alan shifted uncomfortably. "There's something else, Brad. I can't do this anymore. Marcus, he's a good man. He forgave me when I confessed everything. I won't help you ruin his business." Brad's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You what? You confessed? You useless, spineless—" "I'm done," Alan interrupted, standing his ground. "What you're doing is wrong. Marcus doesn't deserve this." Brad waved his hand dismissively. "Get out of my sight. You're fired. And don't think about going back to that loser's restaurant for a job. You've burned that bridge too." Alan nodded, a weight lifting off his shoulders as he turned to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at Brad. "You know, maybe if you treated people with kindness like Marcus does, you wouldn't be losing customers." Before Brad could respond, Alan walked out, leaving Brad alone with his anger and frustration. "It doesn't make any sense," Brad muttered to himself, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Why would the mayor help them? What's in it for him?" Brad had always considered himself on good terms with the mayor. After all, Andrew had been a regular at his diner for years. Surely that counted for something. A glimmer of hope sparked in Brad's mind. Maybe, just maybe, he could use his connection with Andrew to his advantage. If he could confront the mayor after the dinner at Marcus's place, perhaps he could convince him to withdraw his support. "That's it," Brad said, snapping his fingers. "I'll make Andrew see reason. He'll understand that backing these amateurs is a mistake. We go way back. He'll listen to me." What Brad didn't realize was that his perception of his relationship with Andrew was far from reality. Months ago, Andrew had witnessed Brad's cruel treatment of Marcus, the racial discrimination thinly veiled behind fake politeness. That moment had been the catalyst for Andrew's decision to support Marcus and Mary. As the days passed, Brad's plan took shape in his mind. He would ambush Marcus and Mary during their meeting with the benefactor. It was time to put an end to this farce once and for all. The night of the dinner arrived. The restaurant's windows glowed warmly, a stark contrast to the darkness surrounding Brad. He watched as Mary and Marcus served Mayor Andrew inside. "Just you wait," Brad muttered under his breath. "This little dream of yours is about to come crashing down." As the evening wound down, Andrew stepped out of the restaurant, the warm glow of satisfaction evident on his face. Marcus and Mary followed close behind, their eyes shining with gratitude and admiration for the man who had become their unexpected champion. "Thank you again, Mayor Andrew," Marcus said, his voice filled with heartfelt appreciation. "Your support means the world to us." Mary nodded in agreement, adding, "We can't express how grateful we are for everything you've done." Andrew smiled warmly at the couple. "It's been my pleasure. What you've accomplished here is truly remarkable." As they stood chatting on the sidewalk, a figure emerged from the shadows. Brad, his face etched with a mix of anger and desperation, approached the group. "Mayor Andrew," Brad called out, his voice strained. "I need to talk to you." Andrew turned, his expression cooling as he recognized Brad. "Mr. Thompson, what can I do for you?" Brad glanced nervously at Marcus and Mary before focusing on Andrew. "Sir, I've been a loyal customer of yours for years. I need to know why you're supporting this upstart restaurant. They're ruining my business." Andrew's eyes narrowed slightly. "Brad, I support businesses that contribute positively to our community. Marcus and Mary have created something special here." Brad's face reddened. "But what about loyalty? What about tradition? My restaurant has been a staple in this town for years." Andrew took a deep breath, his patience wearing thin. "Brad, let me be clear. Your tradition includes a history of discriminatory practices and racist behavior. I've witnessed it firsthand." Brad's eyes widened in shock. "What? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Andrew's voice was stern. "I was there the day you humiliated Marcus and Mary in your restaurant. I saw how you treated them differently based on the color of their skin." Brad stumbled back a step, the weight of his actions finally catching up to him. I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," Andrew cut him off. "You've been operating under the assumption that your status and connections would shield you from consequences. But actions have repercussions, Brad." As Brad stood there, his face a mixture of shock and shame, Marcus stepped forward. "Brad," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "There's something else you need to see." Mary reached into her purse and pulled out a small tablet. With a few taps, she brought up a video and held it out for everyone to see. The grainy security camera footage played, showing a masked figure approaching their restaurant late at night. Brad's eyes widened in horror as he watched himself on the screen. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "We have proof of your vandalism, Brad," Marcus said quietly. "We've known for a while now." Brad stumbled backward, his face pale. I didn't... How did you... Andrew's expression hardened as he watched the video. "This is beyond unacceptable, Brad. Not only have you displayed racist behavior, but you've also resorted to criminal acts to sabotage a competing business." The weight of his actions seemed to crash down on Brad all at once. His shoulders slumped, and tears began to well up in his eyes. He looked from Andrew to Marcus and Mary, his lips trembling. I'm so sorry," Brad choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what came over me. I was scared of losing everything I'd built." He turned to Marcus and Mary, his eyes filled with genuine remorse. "What I did to you both was inexcusable. The way I treated you, the things I said, and then vandalizing your restaurant. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. Brad's tears flowed freely now as he continued. Mayor Andrew, I've betrayed your trust. I understand if you want to press charges. I'll accept whatever consequences come my way. The group stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Brad's confession hanging in the air. Then, to everyone's surprise, Brad, he said softly. What you did was hurtful and wrong, but I can see that you're truly sorry. Marcus glanced at Mary, who nodded in agreement. He turned back to Brad and continued, We forgive you, Brad. We believe in second chances, and we hope this can be a turning point for you. Brad looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. You forgive me? After everything I've done? Mary stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened. It means choosing to move forward without holding on to bitterness. We hope you'll use this opportunity to reflect and grow. Brad nodded, wiping his eyes. Thank you. I don't deserve your kindness, but I promise I'll do better. I'll make things right. Andrew placed a hand on Brad's shoulder. This is your chance to change, Brad, to be a better person and a better member of our community. Don't waste it. Brad nodded solemnly, then turned to leave. As he walked away, his shoulders were slumped, but there was a sense of a weight being lifted, the weight of hatred and prejudice that he had carried for so long. Marcus and Mary stood hand in hand, gazing at their bustling restaurant. The warm glow of the lights inside spilled onto the sidewalk, inviting passers-by to peek in at the lively atmosphere. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted through the open windows, a testament to the joy their dream had brought to the community. Can you believe it, Mary? Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. We did it. We really did it. Mary squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride and love. We sure did, honey. Look at what we've built together. They watched as families, couples, and friends streamed in and out of their restaurant, each person leaving with a smile on their face and a full belly. The sight filled them both with an overwhelming sense of accomplishment and gratitude. They thanked Andrew for all he had done for them and escorted him back to his car. They found a quiet corner of the restaurant and sat down, taking a moment to reflect on their journey. The challenges they had faced seemed almost insurmountable at times, but their love and determination had carried them through. You know, Marcus said, his voice low and thoughtful, there were moments when I thought about giving up, when Brad rejected us, when those investors turned us away. I felt like maybe the world was trying to tell us something. Mary reached across the table and took his hand. But you didn't give up. We didn't give up. And look where it got us. Marcus nodded, a lump forming in his throat. It wasn't just about proving Brad wrong or showing those investors what they missed out on. It was about standing up to something bigger than all of that. The racism, Mary said softly, her eyes filled with understanding. The prejudice that tried to hold us back at every turn. Exactly, Marcus agreed. But we didn't let it win. We fought back with kindness, with hard work, and with love. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their accomplishment sink in. They had won, not just against Brad and his narrow-minded views, but against a system that had tried to keep them down. You know what I'm most proud of? Mary asked, her eyes twinkling. Marcus raised an eyebrow, curious. What's that? The way we did it, she said firmly. We didn't stoop to Brad's level. We didn't let bitterness or anger drive us. We stayed true to ourselves and our values. Marcus nodded, feeling a swell of pride in his chest. You're right. We showed everyone that success doesn't have to come at the cost of your integrity. So, Marcus said with a grin, what's next for us? Mary laughed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Who knows? But whatever it is, we'll face it together, just like we always have. Hand in hand, they stood up, ready to dive back into the bustling atmosphere of their restaurant. They had overcome racism, prejudice, and countless obstacles to get here. But more than that, they had proven that love, determination, and staying true to one's values could conquer even the toughest challenges. If you enjoyed the story of Marcus, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.